Welcome to Schism. In this fragment, we trace the roots of QAnon in the early days of the World Wide Web and the very first alternate reality game. What can a little-known 1977 psychology experiment teach us about how consensus reality is manufactured? And what does the massive growth of Q tell us about the likelihood of reality chaos in our immediate future? In the early 1990s, programmer, artist, and writer Joseph Matheny started publishing Ongs Hat.
Journal entry, October 13th, 1992. I finally get a line on Incunabula. Following a lead from a culture jamming club in San Francisco, I arrive in the small New Jersey town of Ongs Hat. The address I have for Incunabula is a P.O. box. The local postmaster/general store operator was very helpful, almost too helpful. He told me that Cranston and Incunabula Books had fled the area one night about a month ago. I gained access to Cranston's P.O. box key while the owner had his back turned and returned later to examine the contents.
Some have called Ongs Hat the first alternate reality game.
We started out doing it with things like mail art and Xerox culture art, phone calls, voicemails, postering, all the things of the 80s counterculture. As I started to play around with kind of the new form of communication at the time, I started to see the possibility for using bulletin board systems, and then probably around 92, I started thinking about internet, because that's when internet really became publicly accessible for not everybody, but for some people.
The story Matheny started to unfold revolved around a facility in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, where a group of renegade Princeton professors create a new device for interdimensional travel. From fragments in zines and photocopies planted in bookstores and coffee shops, Ongs Hat started to migrate onto the earliest public fora of the internet.
I started putting things on Usenet, and I started putting things on FTP sites, Gopher sites, which is a protocol that nobody uses anymore, but it was a really popular protocol back then. I also had personas at the time where I was different characters from the story, and I would go onto the bulletin board systems, and I would post as if I was the character and talk about the things that had happened at Ongs Hat. That would kind of strike up an interest, and then people would go find the documents, and I would help people find the documents obviously as well. What I wanted them to do is have their own experience and then meet other people that had run across the documents and had their experiences and have them trade experiences.
Matheny's narrative, weaving itself together from online and offline elements, pieces of reality mixed with fiction, proved confusing for some players. Instead of just playing a game, they started to believe they were uncovering hidden truths about reality itself.
I was being contacted by people who claimed that they were people who had lived at the ashram at Ongs Hat, or they knew people that lived at the ashram at Ongs Hat, and all these kind of things. And I didn't know whether to take them seriously or not, but I played along with it just because I thought it was interesting, and I didn't want to break the bubble in case they were just playing along. But later, their behavior indicated to me that they weren't playing a game, that they really thought that this was real.
What Joe Matheny discovered as he dropped the breadcrumbs of his narrative in the emergent spaces of the web was just how easy it could be to appear as an authoritative source, conveying secret truths. However outlandish those truths might be, people were sharing and inhabiting the story of Ongs Hat as if it were real. The August 2020 Save Our Children demonstrations saw thousands taking to the streets across the USA and the world.
Hey! Lead us! Lead us!
The protests were the latest installment in the out-of-control narrative that is QAnon. For some, it's a conspiracy theory.
Human trafficking is not a conspiracy theory.
For others, a cult. For Anons themselves, it's a radical new way of getting to the truth of what's going on behind the kayfabe of electoral politics.
When they try to cover things up, they call things a baseless conspiracy theory. So I looked it up for myself, and I changed my browser from Google to DuckDuckGo, and I did my own research, and it's true. This is true. This is real.
That same month, Donald Trump decided to explicitly acknowledge Q as a movement.
Well, I don't know much about the movement other than I understand they like me very much, which I appreciate. These are people that when they watch the streets of Portland, when they watch what happened in New York City in just the last 6 or 7 months, I've heard these are people that love our country and they just don't like seeing it. They do supposedly like me.
At the crux of the theory is this belief that you are secretly saving the world from this satanic cult of pedophiles and cannibals.
Is that supposed to be a bad thing? If I can help save the world from problems, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to put myself out there.
The boundary between online and IRL, shaky from the start, has been steadily eroding. The Q mythos, incubated in 4chan, then spread via 8chan, 8kun, and countless Facebook groups, is now capable not only of mobilizing real people to real streets, but of being name-checked by the President of the United States, who is also, as it happens, the principal character in QAnon's voracious narrative. Back in the early 90s, Joe Matheny saw for himself how a shared online narrative, presented as if it were real, could start to transform the beliefs of the people interacting with it. Beliefs which could then spill over into reality.
And that's what I was trying to encourage, was people to participate in this, to take it on, almost like a LARP. We all know that this isn't real, but like wink and nudge, suspension of disbelief, and let's have fun with this. And clearly there are people that are not equipped to play this kind of game. A lot of weird things have been happening. So I got a concealed carry permit and I started to travel with a gun. Carload of people that were dressed up like MIBs with the black suits and the little thin black ties and the sunglasses ran me off the road. And at first I thought that it was an accident. And then when I got out of the car and they got out of the car and I saw how they were dressed, I took my pistol out and I fired a couple rounds off over their head. We were out in the country. And they immediately got back in their car and they left very fast. But these are some of the negative aspects of people who get into these things and think it's all too real and that they're some sort of agent for good and that they're out to defeat the agents of bad and save the world. If you really, really, really thought you were living in the Matrix and you really thought you were Neo, think about what you would do, what you would be capable of doing. That's scary. You'd be like the guy who went to Comet Ping Pong with a gun, right? To save the children.
Ongs Hat unfolded during a period in which the mainstream media seemed willfully oblivious to the power the internet would come to wield.
Let me introduce you to QAnon, a deranged internet phenomenon trying desperately to elbow its way into the mainstream.
Today, convinced QAnon is materially impacting political reality, the media are all over it.
Pro-Trump QAnon movement.
Supporters of QAnon were out in full force.
QAnon fans believe that Trump is the savior.
It's a litany of right-wing QAnon conspiracies.
There has been an awakening. Have you felt it?
QAnon has 20 to 30 million views a month it was generating for 8chan before 8chan went down.
But this is a strange loop. However disapproving, their coverage only grants Q further reality.
Maddie, what's going on?
With each repetition of its name,
They're coming.
its ideas and its slogans,
Who is coming?
Q is reaching into broadcast, and broadcast is in turn feeding the Q mythos. To understand what is going on here, how Ongs Hat and Q came for some people to seem realer than real, we need to go back to 1977. Two cognitive science researchers in Pennsylvania carried out an experiment. On a tape machine, they recorded a series of true and false statements, such as
the People's Republic of China was founded in 1947.
False, and
the thigh bone is the longest bone in the human body.
True. As participants listened, the statements were played back to them again and again, and they were repeatedly asked to rank each one as uncertain, possibly true, probably, or definitely true. What participants' answers revealed was that their confidence in the statements repeated most often increased over time, while their confidence in the other statements didn't change at all. The researchers had stumbled over what is now known as the illusory truth effect. Regardless of a source's perceived credibility, repeated exposure to information increases the sense that it's true. What this suggests is that repetition may play a massive role in establishing what we experience as real. American schoolchildren citing the Pledge of Allegiance, church liturgies, the mantras of the East, the shared reading of national newspapers every morning. This is how communities, peoples, and nations are formed. And it explains why modern advertising and public relations rely on the endless repetition of images, slogans, and songs in the fight for what is called mindshare.
Double your pleasure, double your fun with double good double mint gum. A double pleasure's waiting for you. A double pleasure for double mint gum. A double pleasure's waiting for you. A double pleasure for double mint gum. A double pleasure's waiting for you. A double pleasure for double mint gum.
This same repetition of illusory truths sells politicians, elections, and even wars. In his book *Sapiens*, Yuval Noah Harari argues that these repeated illusory truths are actually a key structural element of human society.
The basic method is to get everybody in our community telling the same story and doing it again and again and again and again and again and again. If you grow up in a society and you hear everybody telling you the same story from a very early age, there is very little chance that you will doubt this story. So this is the basic method that has been used throughout history.
In fact, Harari says it was the ability to invent and share stories about the world, from cave paintings through to myths, legends, and entire religions, which accelerated Homo sapiens out of small communities into the mega-societies of today.
History begins about 70,000 years ago with the cognitive revolution. We've gained remarkable cognitive abilities. Above all, abilities to communicate, to use language, and to create and spread fictions. These new cognitive abilities turned our species from this insignificant ape into the most powerful force on the planet.
What this means is that there is no clean break between illusions, fake news, propaganda, and reality, things we count as very real. Nations, money, human rights, laws, justice are actually shared fictions, and yet the world we live in is structured around them.
Basic message is that without these fictions, no society could function, at least not any large-scale society.
In this vision, we live in a kind of dual reality, the imagined and the real, alongside each other, constantly feeding back on one another. Changing the stories we believe in changes our behavior. This is how illusory truths start to fold themselves into reality, and in doing so, make themselves real. This is the strange magic at the heart of even apparently orderly societies. Shared stories hold the whole thing together, and the transmission and repetition of those stories determines what we experience as real.
For a stable society, you need to have at least some stories about which everybody agrees. Of course, there are occasions when you have conflicting stories, and then you have big problems.
The internet has afforded us the power to manufacture and distribute our own narratives about the world at scale, a power previously only available to gatekeepers, to governments, news media, Hollywood. As a result, more QAnons will almost certainly happen. And if Harari is right and the stories we tell structure our world, then this multiplication of narratives will cause a fundamental breakdown of reality itself.
In a lot of ways, what I see QAnon as being is a weaponization of what it was I was trying to do with Ongs Hat, which is, let's put together a belief system. Let's see if we can create any real world effects or phenomena out of it. The effects that they're looking for is political in nature. I think originally it might have been more done in fun. And then I think some people took it over and really saw that they could use this as a way to manipulate people, and have done so. And I really didn't think that anybody was being deceived. Maybe what we were trying to do was weird, but it was consent on everybody's part. And I don't know that what QAnon is doing really has everybody's consent. Politicians are taking this cause up because they see what they've got is a small army of zealots on their hands, that they can just come up with anything and post it as a drop, and then people will act on it. And that's the real danger. I think it's a dark story that its only promise is that we can use it as a case study of what not to do in the future.
When Joe Matheny saw what was happening with Ongs Hat, he attempted to cancel the project, telling anyone who'd listen that he'd made it all up. There was no interdimensional travel machine and nothing to find in the New Jersey Pine Barrens.
We are Q.
But the alternate reality of Q, seeming to its followers more and more plausible as they spread and adapted, as it echoes through the forums and platforms that now constitute our public spaces, may now have to flame out by itself. Q has accrued a power beyond its creator's capacity to renounce it.
QAnon crackdown. Facebook banning pages devoted to the Fringe conspiracy movement.
It's even possible Q will survive being banned by the big platforms.
One of the most drastic policy changes Facebook has made in its history.
As its followers migrate to the new, decentralized, censorship-resistant forums springing up in the internet's hinterlands. In this sense, the details of QAnon, who really runs it, or if it is being co-opted, for example, are far less important than what it portends. That mimetic, out-of-control narratives, QAnon-style narratives, will increasingly capture larger and larger mindshares, fragmenting and separating us by the beliefs they bring us to. We will find ourselves in self-referential, solipsistic worlds, no longer cross-compatible with one another. As a model for the near future, Q is indispensable. The political polarization of today looks like it will give way to a balkanization of reality itself. Kingdoms of meaning, duking it out for dominance. May the best reality win. Thanks for watching this fragment of Schism. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the past, gatekeepers decided the content people got to see. Now, it's you, and this is how you make it happen. If you're interested in finding out more about the project and helping us develop it into a feature film, you can get access to scripts, original music, behind-the-scenes footage, and the Schism community over at patreon.com/schismfilm. Your contribution will help us not just make more Schism fragments, but realize our vision for the project. Join us at patreon.com/schismfilm or click the link at the top of the description. Thanks to this episode's sponsor, Joystream, a video platform controlled, owned, and operated by its users. You can help influence the platform's development and earn crypto while doing it right now at joystream.org.